When I was a kid in the 1950s, I had a toy I called a shrunken head, and it was about the size of your fist with long black hair, and it was on a cord. And I thought this was it, this thing up on top of this bookshelf, until yesterday when I took it down and looked at it. So I'm going to take it down again and show it to you. So this is the thing I thought was the shrunken head. It had been on that shelf for like forever, since the mid-1980s. I thought this was it. But when I took it down and looked at it, I discovered that it couldn't be that old because it had a tag on it that said 1980. And I'd bought it at Disneyland, or 1988 rather, and I bought it at Disneyland then for $7. And it's got an incredible amount of cobwebs and dust on it because it's been up there for about 30 years. So I'm going to clean it up and show you the details of this thing, which actually, rather than being a shrunken head, is a hairy skull toy. Of a kind first sold in the 1960s, and that apparently they were still making, or at least selling, in the 1980s. And this is what it looks like after I combed its hair and got all of the dust and cobwebs off of it. Looks pretty good. So it's like a plaster skull. And the one I had when I was a kid, I think might have been rubber, or perhaps it was plaster. But this is plaster, and it's got long black hair. It's got a sort of a ropey kind of cord that hangs on it. And the cord still has the original tag on it. So the tag reads, "Ivan the Hairy One glows in dark." And then on the back, it says, oh, Voodoo Skull, glows in dark, exposed to light, place in dark. So that's where I got the idea that it was a Voodoo Skull. That's what it was called. And over here on the other side, it says copyright 1967 R. Smith. And that has to do with the original maker of it before Disneyland kind of took over the operation, apparently. So I'm going to expose it to some light and see if it glows in the dark. But before I do that, I wanted to show you the original price tag from Disneyland, $7 plus tax, and then in very faint sort of a pinkish kind of color, copyright 1988, the Walt Disney Company, and a very faint Mickey Mouse. That's on the bottom. The plaster itself, as far as I can tell, doesn't have any kind of writing, markings on it, date, or anything else. It's just the plaster, which is painted in areas with black, and the black hair. So this is Ivan the Hairy One, the Voodoo Skull from 1988. So let's see if it glows in the dark. Okay, so now we are in a dark room. Wow, it does not glow in the dark very well. A little bit, but this camera is not picking it up. Okay, I tried that in the dark. It didn't work. There was a very faint glow, but the camera wouldn't pick it up. I think after all those years, his chemicals that glow have kind of worn out. It's been like 30 years. So that's not too surprising. But he's very cool, and he's in great shape. I don't see any chips, and his hair's all there. I had him up high on the shelf so my kids and my grandkids wouldn't bust them up like they have done so many other old toys. Okay, I did a little more research and discovered that this is part of a larger group of skull toys called Randotti skulls, and that was named after the company owners, Randy and Dottie Smith. And the earliest versions, the earliest models, were signed R. Smith for Randy Smith, and that's what the tag on this one says. These were made to to be sold at Disneyland as souvenirs exclusively, I believe. And they started selling their products there in like the second year that Disneyland opened, 1956. And my family lived about 20-minute drive from Disneyland, so we went there as soon as it opened and went probably once a year. So I probably bought something like this in the 1950s when I was about 10. Maybe the same, maybe a little different. Mine might have had more like a shrunken head, shriveled up skin kind of look to the head. But it did have long black hair, and it was on a rope or a string. So I discovered that this one does have some markings on the skull itself. I'd looked on the sides, like a lot of the later ones that are made in the 70s will have an inscription right over here on the bottom of the jaw. Others, I think, may have it over here. Where I didn't look is on the very back of the head. On this one, you lift up the hair, and it's painted black. It's pretty hard to see, but there is an inscription there, and I don't think I can get it very well in this light, but it says copyright 1967 R. Smith. So I'm going to try to take a picture of that thing if I can get it into focus, but it's very hard to see. Oh, here we go. Okay, when you turn it like this, you can see it. So it says copyright 1967 R. Smith. So apparently this is a model that dates back to 67, but it was sold at the park in 1988. So I'm thinking either that was like what they call new old stock, something that was made back then and was still being sold as a new product, or maybe they just continued to make this model into the 80s. Although it was originally made in 1967. So it's a very early model of this thing. Pretty cool. I also read that some of them have the damage here in the forehead like this one, and some of them don't. Some of them have additional features like an eye patch. That's for ones that were sold in the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. They were also sold in Adventureland and in the New Orleans Square, and also the Magic Shop that's on Main Street. So they were sold in the shops there from the 1956 into the 80s. The later ones from the 70s, later than this one, are marked. One I saw some photos of one that was marked 1974. And then there's also ones that say on them they're marked Randotti. This one doesn't say that anywhere. It's just R. Smith. So what I'm thinking is that I had something like this when I was a kid, and when I got to be a teenager, I gave all my toys to my younger brother because I felt like I'd outgrown them, which was kind of stupid, but gave him everything, you know. Probably gave him one of these things too. And then later, in the 80s, I was feeling nostalgic and bought this one as a replacement. So it's a pretty cool thing. Apparently they're quite rare now. And I hope you enjoy seeing it. Thanks a lot. Bye.